right, we're on the air, and I would like to introduce Kelly Gilfillan. She is the publisher of the managing editor, I'm sorry, publisher of the Homepage Media Group. Kelly?
Hello, everybody. Homepage Media Group, I just want to, in case for those who are seeing this on TV and YouTube don't know who we are, we're a local, hyperlocal online news sites for Williamson County. We have franklinhomepage.com and then Brentwood, Spring Hill, and Nolensville homepages.com. And about a year ago, well, first of all, welcome to the audience, and thank you very much to the panelists for being here. But we did want to tell you a little bit about why we're here today and how we got here. This has been a journey for our team in the office and in a friendship. And my dear friend Trish, her son passed away in 2016, and we in January of 2017, it had been a year since his death, and we were together, we were neighbors, and we were together, and I shared with her, and I hesitated to do so because it was such an it was an amazing thing, but it was also, I was worried it was going to be hard for her to hear, that her son's obituary was our #1 story on Brentwood homepage in 2016, our most read story. And she shared with me that night that she had been mourning for a year, and that she wanted something good to come out of this tragedy that her family and all of her son's friends and had suffered. And just a few days later, I ran into Sheriff Long at a social event and shared with him Trish's story, and that we were concerned and wanted to do something about the suicides that were happening on the Natchez Trace Bridge, and overall just about suicide in general, and just starting to take some steps in our community more outwardly to have prevention and to just make it more of a topic that we were all willing to talk about. So Brooke came on board, and Brooke Wanzer, our Franklin homepage and county reporter, and picked it up immediately and said, I want to do this series. I want to do this. And I just meant a lot to me that she did that. So thank you, Brooke. We feel a responsibility as a news organization, and as members of our community. Over half of our staff lives in Williamson County. We feel a responsibility to give back to our community, and not just to tell the story of what happened with Trish and John, but also to provide potential solutions. There's a thing going around in America called solutions journalism, and we learned about that about a year ago at a conference. And I just wanted to let this be the homepage's first foray into solutions journalism. And Trish opened that door when she said she wanted to make a difference. So I wanted to introduce the panelists real quick, and then we'll turn it over to Brooke and Mark. On my right, the audience's right, is Dr. James Wellborn. He's a clinical child psychologist based in Brentwood. He specializes in individual, family, and group psychotherapy with children and adolescents, addressing family and peer conflict, oppositional or risk-taking behavior, attention disorders, parenting, discipline problems, academic motivation, school failure, alcohol and other drug issues, depression, anxiety, and obsessive-compulsive disorders. He's the author of Raising Teens in the 21st Century, a practical guide to effective parenting. And if you look under the columnist section in any of the homepages in Williamson County, you will see Dr. Wellborn's columns. And he did a fantastic job addressing the show 13 Reasons Why, which is a show about teen suicide. And so if you have questions, I refer you to that, and he did a fantastic job on that. Next to Dr. Wellborn is Trish Morello, my dear friend. She was a Brentwood resident and is now a Spring Hill resident. And she lived in Brentwood when her 17-year-old son, John, took his life from the bridge in January of 2016. She wants to give back to the community by discussing ways to be proactive about mental illness and prevent suicide. Next to Trish is Williamson County Sheriff Jeff Long, who has worked in law enforcement for over 40 years and was elected as sheriff in 2008. Long has discussed his frustration with suicides in the county, especially from the bridge, expressing concern about the issue at meetings with National Park Service representatives. Chief Ranger, Joanne Purley, who is the statewide initiatives and development coordinator for the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network. Purley's father's death by suicide in 2011 was the impetus for her involvement in the field of suicide prevention. She is a graduate of the University of Alabama at Birmingham, where she obtained a master's in public health with a primary focus on the public health approach to suicide prevention. Next to her is Chief Ranger Sarah Davis, who works for the National Park Service. She's the Chief Ranger at the National Park Service at the Natchez Trace Parkway. She has been with the Park Service for more than 20 years. And Daniel Kimes joins her from the Park Service, and he is the Northern District Ranger. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark Cook, our managing editor at Homepage Media Group, and Brooke Wanzer.
Thank you, Kelly. Well, we're here to talk about suicide in general. The Natchez Trace Bridge has become a means of suicide, and one of the ways to address suicide is to try and gain control of the means. But it's not all about the Natchez Trace Bridge. Certainly, I'm sure Sheriff Long can attest to that suicide is a big problem. In 2016, it hit a record in Tennessee with 1,110 suicides, about 3 a day. And the documentation that Brooke has found indicates that about 30 suicides have taken place since 2000 off the bridge. Some of the records don't match up, and so at least 30 have taken place, and we'd like to talk about that as well. But Trish Morello is the person who led us to this discussion, and hopefully maybe the key to a solution to denying at least one means and maybe changing someone's mind. Mm-hmm. And we'd like to hear from you first, Trish. Can you tell us about your journey?
You know, the first time I walked across that bridge, we had just moved here in 2007, and everyone said, oh, here are the local sites, blah, blah, blah. So we went there. I got, 10 feet onto that bridge, and every hair on my arm just stood up. It felt incredibly dangerous. The railing, I know online, it says it's 32.5 inches, I believe. I've measured 31, depending on where you're standing, since John's death. But I couldn't even walk across it. The kids, I had twins. They were 9 years old. I turned around. And ironically, I found a picture from that day where we only got so far, took a picture, and got off. Little did I know that would come back to haunt me years later. But I know several people who have said they feel the bridge is very unsafe. I know cyclists who worry when they go over it. They stay in the middle. They don't get in the groove. I mean, there's a whole planning thing that goes on when they cross it. And there is something to be said about means restriction. The argument doesn't hold that they'll just find another way. It doesn't hold. There's actual research that explains means restriction works. And I have all kinds of examples I won't go into right now, but you've got to take away this incredibly easy way for someone to end their life. Jumpers are impulsive. They're not planners. They don't have a plan B. The planners tend to be more, Dr. Welburn could maybe either disagree or agree with me. The planners tend to be more drugs, overdoses, maybe wrists, things like that. Jumpers, they want it quick, they want it easy, they want it deadly. Boom.
Trish, can you tell us a little bit, can you tell us what your process and what your journey has been since your son's death in January of 2016, and a bit about that?
Well, you know, I knew I wanted to do something, but some time had to go by. I had to you know, just let things scab over a little bit, I contacted the AFSP, American Federation for Suicide Prevention, and they said, come back in 2 years. We'd love to have you, but, you know, let things scab over a little bit. Had a house to sell, moved, all that jazz, and now I had always said that the next thing would be, my mission would be to make some good come of this. And I don't know what it exactly will be, but to me, the bridge is the most practical, actionable thing we can do right now. I'm all for suicide hotlines. I'm all for a phone there. But my son was not going to call a phone number at 3 in the morning on that January day. He just wasn't going to do it. Those folks are resigned.
Can you tell us a little bit more about John?
He was a beautiful boy. He was brilliant. He was sweet. He always had a smile on his face. He was perfect. He was this someone we need many more of in this world. And he hid this depression for years, until he couldn't stand it anymore. And finally had to tell me, and by then he was so far gone. Even though he went to school every day, he got a full ride to college, he got a 35 on his ACT, he had perfect attendance, and I don't want him to sound like he was a perfectionist. He wasn't, believe me. He got those grades by the seat of his pants, you know. He was not a studier. He just was blessed with this, in one way, wonderful brain. On the other side, a not-so-great brain. So, you know, I think our divorce was the trigger for him. Even though we made it as amicable as could be, and still, you know, we were there for birthdays together and Christmas together, I think his heart was broken. And I think that was the trigger. And again, Dr. Wilburn could tell us, I've read with kids, it's biological and biographical. So if they're wired for depression, it can stay there latent if there's no trigger. But then if there's a trigger, boom. But he carried on. No one had a clue until I could see it on him that last year, and he finally told me. And he gave me a false sense of, he told me one night, I said, please don't lock this door. I was worried about him. He said, I'm just going to go to bed. You know, it's you know. And he could just tell me, he just said, it's happening, you know. And I said, please don't lock this door. And he said from inside his room, Mom, I would never do anything stupid. So, you can't take any of that for granted. You can't. So, anyway, a couple of nights before he died, he had been slipping again. He was dipping. He was coming home, going straight to bed, or staying up all night. But I'd seen him worse, you know. And then that morning, when he wasn't home, I was shocked, but I wasn't shocked. It was strange. I'd seen him worse, so in that way I was shocked, but I kind of think part of me knew, I don't know, in a strange way, that this was coming. I don't know. Just because he so wouldn't have told me all of this if it hadn't been so organically in his DNA at that point of wanting to end his life. But the question is, what do you do? Do you put a kid like that in a hospital who's going to school every day? What do you do? He was seeing a psychiatrist. He was on medication. A week before, the psychiatrist thought they'd had a great meeting. And that very night, when I looked into his computer, he was Googling suicide. The night of his last very good appointment with a psychiatrist. So.
Dr. Wellburn, could you address like the impulsivity versus the planning and some of those aspects?
Sure. I guess the first thing that I'm kind of worried about is that it's a really impossible and inaccurate and unwise thing to do to try and kind of analyze after the fact what somebody could have done or not done, because it presumes that there was something that was clear and certain and for sure that could have been done. In this case, for John not to end up having killed himself. And so I'm really aware of that right now and talking about some of the things that go into the problems that as parents, which is what I think about it because I'm a adolescent psychologist, and so I think about it from the parent's perspective about what are the things that feed into somebody ending up deciding to try and kill themselves, because we're also talking about what we're discussing here is folks who have successfully killed themselves as opposed to folks who have tried and not succeeded. And that's a much larger number, a dramatically much larger number than the folks who end up being successful at that. So the other problem about talking about this in a condensed way for me is that there's a whole range of factors that can lead to the similar kind of converge on a person coming to the place where they are feeling like and then actually going to attempt to kill themselves. So it's not just, not all of them are impulsive in the sense of being impulsive people. Not all of them have a inherent kind of disposition toward depression or are struggling with it in that sense, in the kind of traditional sense of depression. And so there's a range of things that can lead somebody down the path and end up in that place. Loss is a big feature in that. Okay, so there's certainly there's this kind of range of things for me that are ways to potentially think about the potential risk for somebody being suicidal, and I have ended up separating them out into categories of kind of what are the worrisome signs and what are the signs where there's a more of sense of them being at risk, and then there's the signs of them being in some kind of danger of they're actually trying to act on that. And so the worrisome signs are things like if you experience a major loss or if you have some kind of failure, a dramatic kind of disruption in your life that's humiliating or embarrassing. For kids, there's like bullying and harassment. These are kind of the signs that could then, along with other things, start them on the path to thinking about this. So with these worrisome things that I'm talking about, that's not the time that you jump up and grab a hold of your kid and hold them to you and don't let them get away from you. This is the time when you start looking, which it sounds like that Trish is describing, about noticing that there's some things that are worrisome that are going on. So mood changes, sleeplessness, if they start to isolate themselves, they lose interest in things. In Williamson County, especially, it's true lots of places, but there's a particular concentration of kids who are stressed overachievers, and that's both kids who are actually achieving, and it's kids who aspire to achieve and are not. And so it's a whole range of kind of ways that you can start redefining what constitutes success or achievement that's distorted with kids who are high achievers or really kind of ambitious. There's a whole set of at-risk signs that are when you should be actually kind of reaching out and grabbing a hold of your kid, not the tight grip yet, but just kind of reaching out and getting a hold of them. And that's if there's some worrisome signs, and then there's already been a previous awareness of your kid having suicidal ideation, or especially if there's been a suicidal attempt. And so any history of that automatically, when there's any kind of worrisome stuff going on, it's important to grab a hold of them. But histories of psych hospitalization, there are particular more serious diagnoses of psychiatric conditions like depression, bipolar disorder, or even in extreme cases schizophrenia. If there's a family history of suicide or major depression that has with somebody in the family who's had suicidal ideation, those are kinds of things especially if your kid is starting to talk about things in ways that makes it look like they're helpless. They've got a sense of helplessness or worthlessness, or that there's a pessimism about how things are going to end up in the future. Intense family conflict, and so Trish is talking about that the potential for divorce, among other kinds of things, just arguing in the family. Now, so let me say it again. This is in that at-risk sign, and so if you're getting a divorce and your kids are upset about that, that's not the indication you should jump up and think, oh my goodness, my kid is going to try and kill themselves. It's just one of those things that when the stress increases and when the intensity increases, and then when you start putting together some of these other things, it becomes really, the intensity of that can, for some kids, lead them to get stuck and start to think that there's no way out of what they can do. And then, of course, there's the signs where you grab a hold to your kid and you don't let them out of your sight until you've got some people involved who can start helping you look at what's going on. And that's things like if they're talking about suicide or dying, or anything that has to do with death that's about some aspect of has a positive kind of quality to that happening. Of course, there's a kind of a well-established notion about some people will start actually acting like it's almost like they're acting like they're leaving. So they'll start giving away possessions. They don't care about the things that belong to them and that have previously been important to them. If any kind of idealizing or kind of speaking positively about death. And then also the thing with teenagers is that teenagers joke and kid and pick about a lot of stuff, but joking about suicide, when you've also got these worrisome or at-risk kinds of indicators in there, becomes something to pay very close attention to. And then kind of, I guess, cumulatively, if more and more of these worrisome and at-risk signs you're like checking off, that's when you need some other eyes on this for your kid. That's when you go and get psychiatrists. That's when you go and get therapists, often in combination, that for kind of addressing two different aspects of the things that could be going on. So that, and that's, I've said a whole lot of stuff, and I've kind of given a whole long list, but what I can tell you is that in the column that's in the homepage, the first of those 13 reason columns has these lists on there. And so you can look at both a whole list of the things that kids get stressed out about, which is a big indicator kind of keeping track of your kid. And then there's a whole nother set of these kinds of indicators. And of course, it also turns out that Joanne can speak about is the Tennessee Suicidal Network, a prevention network, has all kinds of stuff on there. It's like a wealth of resources about this stuff.
And we have a lot of material from them right here that is available for anybody in the audience if they'd like
And
to
if I
use it.
can, real quick, I'm sorry, Brooke, but I do want to, Trish, I want to speak to you, and want to say from my heart as a fellow survivor of loss
Likewise.
that
Yes.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to make sure to extend that to others who may have also lost a loved one to suicide, may have had that lived experience, may have had those thoughts of suicide. So I just wanted to extend that to you.
And to you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you, sir, for all those resources, right? So the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, TSPN.org, and I'll show you in 1 second, sorry. TSPN.org has everything on that, all those risk factors, those warning signs you were addressing. So please hunt us down and look us up. Okay.
Thank you, Joanne. I want to back up just a minute. I want to talk about the bridge a little bit more, and I was hoping Sheriff Long could start off, and then I wanted our National Park representatives to talk about this. But Sheriff Long, can you tell us about you and your officers' experience with the bridge, and when that started to become a problem that you noticed?
Well, it's been a problem for a while, and it has increased over the last several years. It's at a point now, unfortunately, where if we receive a person missing or threatening suicide and no one knows where they are, it's gotten so routine now that we routinely send squad cars to the bridge, just hoping to prevent. That's on a regular basis by doing that. You were talking about impulsive and planning. The only one that sticks in my mind of a planning at one time is we had a gentleman from Virginia who actually researched the bridge on the internet and drove down, and when we found his automobile, his computer was still in the car showing the MapQuest of the way to get to the bridge. So that is one that really stuck out in the mind about someone who really took time to plan and knew some way had found out about the bridge and came to the bridge.
So for our National Parks representatives, Sarah Davis and Daniel Kimes, can you talk a little bit about the issue of suicide in national parks? It's kind of a documented phenomenon by now. And you have, I know Sarah has worked with national parks for quite a while now. What has your experience been? Why do you think people are drawn to suicide in national parks?
You know, the National Park Service protects some of the most amazing wonders in our country. Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, the Natchez Trace Parkway. And we preserve and protect for future generations. And from what we understand is people often want a quiet place, solitude, and a place of beauty for their last memory. And that's what we understand is why we do have quite a few people who do come to national parks to commit suicide.
Is there a particular park in the system that has an exceptional number?
There are. There's several. Golden Gate National Recreation Area is the highest, and they have, I think I read a couple days ago, 19 one year. And it's folks jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge and landing in the national park. And then there's Coronado National Monument. And in that park, beautiful park with a mountain with windy curves. And I'm sorry, it's Colorado National Monument, not Coronado. And people just decide to drive off. Other parks I've worked in, Shenandoah National Park, being near a major metropolitan area, they have usually several a year. So people just, I think we all love our parks, and it's a place that you remember as a happy place at the time, and maybe that's why they go.
Now, is there, both for you, Sarah, and for you, Sheriff Long, is there training that your officers go through to deal with suicide prevention, such?
Yeah, we actually held a joint training about 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago, where we had someone come in and do some training on how to handle persons who are contemplating suicide or we believe are going to try to attempt suicide, and also dealing with emotionally disturbed persons and how to handle them and how to speak with them. We also, our officers go through training on how to deal with folks with autism or other learning issues. And so we try to make sure our staff is trained on how to handle something like that. To, if they do show up and can stop it, they try to.
The State Police Officer Standards and Training Commission requires law enforcement in Tennessee now to have annual training on dealing with the mentally ill, the special needs and types, and it's built into the yearly requirement of mandatory training that law enforcement has to have. So our agency has that. We have worked with the Park Service in the past to try to do some training with them also.
And I will say we did have a success story over the weekend. A ranger happened to come through Monday night. Ranger was, he lives up in this area, and he was driving back and went across the bridge and saw a vehicle parked there. And he told me, I talked to him this morning about it, and he said he saw the car and said, I need to stop and talk with them. And he walked up to the car and asked the lady, he's like, are you here to jump? And she said, yes, I am. And he was able to talk her out of it and get her in his car and get her some help.
And that's pretty routine. On our statistics from last year, we were actually able to save about equal or more than what jumped. So our officers do a really good job, I think, talking and trying to slow the process down a little bit, and have been successful on saving those lives.
Right. Our one ranger who I was speaking to, he also said he wanted to thank and asked me to thank you, Sheriff Long, for, I understand you have zones for your officers, and the 96 is the line between the two zones, and so your officers come and sit there when they're doing paperwork to make sure there's a presence there, and that's been very helpful. So thank you for thinking of that and doing that.
That's great.
What is the effect of answering these calls on law enforcement officers themselves? Do you have any officers who have responded to multiple incidents out there?
We've had several that are repeat because of the zones. They may be in that zones, or that it's so regular, unfortunately, that our second shift, which is our evening shift, seems to be the one that gets the majority of them. And they have responded so many times, and you know, I worry about them. I mean, it's something that wears on you. I've been in law enforcement for 44 years, and I can recall cases from years ago. And after a while, if an officer tells you it doesn't bother them, they're really not being truthful to themselves or to you, because eventually it'll wear on you, and it does our officers. And we're at a point now, because of the regularity, we're making them debrief. We're having them to stress debrief and talk to some of the other officers that are on debriefing teams, and then also we're fortunate to have a chaplain service for our agency, and we have them talk to the chaplain also.
And I'll make a comment on that. I've been in law enforcement for 22 years, 16 years on the Natchez Trace in this district, and have personally responded to a number of death cases, both at the bridge and up and down the parkway. It's one of the most difficult cases that a ranger can respond to, or a deputy police officer, trooper, doesn't matter. Seeing someone that has reached that point of taking their own life, as Sheriff Long mentioned, it does take a toll, and it builds. It's something that after you've worked so many of them, you know, it's not something you become callous to. It's something that starts to build in your own mind, and you know, rangers, officers can experience nightmares from certain ones. We talk about triggers that lead someone to suicide. There's also triggers for officers who respond. You know, it may be a trigger that reminds that officer of their own child or someone in their family or someone that they knew, and that's the one that sticks with them and causes them their own emotional stress after the fact. One of the most difficult parts of working, you know, these cases is having to go and tell the family that you know, their child is not coming home, or their significant other. And I've made many of those notifications myself at, you know, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and just me and that family. And it's one of the most difficult things we ever go through, something you never forget.
Sheriff Long mentioned a minute ago some of the statistics that the Williamson County Sheriff keeps. And I was wondering, because I used Freedom of Information Act requests to access the names of the people who died by suicide at the bridge. And the original names, the original data I received from Sarah omitted some names, and she later came to me and she said, "I'm sorry, we gave you the wrong information," and I sort of had come to a similar conclusion after getting some names from Sheriff Long, and I'm wondering, why is there a discrepancy? What happened? You said something about your system crashed, and so why aren't these statistics up to date?
What you said is exactly what happened. We had a computer-based reporting system that was running on DOS. And
up until 2012.
Mm-hmm. Wow. And it crashed. And when it did, we lost a lot of our records. And we were able to go through and find a lot of them paper records. But park rangers are a, what is the best way to say it? All who wander are not lost. We have some who will stay in one park for a long time, and then we have a lot who move around periodically, changing parks. And so you can lose information. And it was unfortunate that we lost that database. We were able to put some of it back together and find it. And then there's some occasions where we may have a record or had something happen and Williamson County did not respond, or vice versa. And so we may not get the information from each other, and that can cause some discrepancies as well. And that's something we've worked on. We now have a new agreement with Williamson County that was made in 2017, and it says that we will exchange records on any of these incidents.
Well, I'd like to go back to something that Trish mentioned, and that is the height of the railing, how cyclists react to it. If it's no higher than a bicycle wheel, could you not get stung by a yellow jacket and hit the railing? And have there been accidental deaths from the bridge?
Nothing that we have, the evidence has led us to believe it was accidental. Everything has, there has been evidence to lead, whether it's notes, things left at the house. We have never had a conclusion of an accidental fall from the bridge.
Okay. Have you ever heard complaints or concerns about?
I have not. In my 16 years on the parkway, I have not. Now, I'm scared of heights, I will say that. I don't like walking on the bridge myself, especially at 2 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
But no, I've not had any actual complaints of it.
Let me jump into it because I know what's coming, I guess. And they've tried every way in the world. I want to make that clear that these two, I've talked to about it, they've tried, it's above their level, and I understand that and I get that. But I don't understand why we can't put up a netting or something on the side of that bridge. I get the aesthetic value of it, but I also drive down McHatcher Parkway here in Franklin. There are bridges that have like a metal fencing to them that looks really attractive, I think. I don't understand, other than the funding, it has to come out of Washington, and we all know that. And that's the answer I've gotten. In order, and I didn't realize this, it's a park service, and in order to change a park, it's not just the funding. You have to go through the park commission and all this historical things to get anything added to it. But, you know, come on. I mean, we've got enough. We've got enough deaths. Why can't we do it and save one more? And let's put up some netting or something. The cost shouldn't matter when it comes to saving the life.
It's not a large span. It's what, that is what, 500 and some feet? Over 90?
Almost a mile.
I mean, just over 96. Just over, it is?
Yes, the bridge itself is almost a mile long.
Oh, my gosh, okay. Well, still.
Let me just back up really quickly. Can you guys tell us what some of the things that you guys have done to curb suicides from the bridge since the first recorded suicide in 2000?
We have obviously increased patrols as much as possible, made the bridge a priority, both us and with Williamson County. One of the people that I hired from Golden Gate. He's a trained hostage negotiator, so he has been through several classes on working with disturbed individuals and reasoning with them, and he's worked together with Williamson County on several. He's the one that saved the one on Monday night. We have installed signs on both ends for the suicide prevention hotline. We are, one of my projects this year is researching installing call boxes that would give, you know, an immediate a means of calling for help should they decide to do so. And I'm working with Williamson County with the communications 911, EMA, and the Sheriff's Office on that, on cooperation of how those calls can be best routed to receive immediate help, because it's not necessarily best for those to reach our dispatcher who's in Mississippi, where they have to turn around and call someone, you know, across 2 states. So we're working together on that to make sure the help is as fast as possible.
Do you have a projected time when that would be completed?
We're going through compliance, which is a time-consuming process. The Park Service has special hoops we have to go through and special regulations. One of the challenges is the bridge is eligible for the National Historic Registry. And any change to the bridge means it cannot be on the National Historic Registry. And so that makes it difficult for us to think about changes. And even putting the call boxes in, the Natchez Trace Parkway is a designed landscape. There are trees that are planted, and you can go back to the original drawings of the parkway, and that tree was planted there for a purpose, for a landscape purpose. And so it can make it very difficult for us. Can we go, okay, we know it's going to be a negative impact on the design landscape and still do something? Yes, we can. But it is something that we are required by law to think about before we do. And so it does take time to get through things and to have things done. I would hope to have these call boxes in by the end of the summer.
And if I may, I'm sorry, I'm the interrupter. That's what I do apparently. But I want to give a shout out to Scott Ridgway, our executive director of the Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network. 16 years ago, he was on the forefront. Please put some signs on this bridge. And I also do want to give a little bit more history on the Golden Gate Bridge. I know y'all can probably speak to it better than I, but in the profession, this is definitely, the nets there are something they've been working on for low in like 20 years.
70s.
Yeah, so since
Yeah.
the 70s, and this is just now coming to fruition. So it is a huge process that they have to undertake to get this life-saving measure put in place.
And one thing I want to mention too about the nets, it's not a net.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not jump and wee.
Yeah.
It's a 1-inch steel cable that's in 1-foot squares. And the purpose is if you jump, you are to break something. And that way you can't leave that spot so they can go rescue you. And that's something you need to be aware of, that when they are put in, that is it. We say net, but it's not really it. It's a fall prevention measure.
But do people still jump when there's a net there? Because I've read instances where it stopped. Why would you jump into a net?
That's kind of the purpose is, you know, you're
You
not
just-
going to
you're not gonna
fall,
do it.
Yeah.
but you're going to be gravely injured.
But I mean, you're not even going to attempt it. Why
Right.
would you? If you're not going to die.
I
right?
haven't visited there myself, but I
Yeah.
do supervise a ranger that worked there, and they just go to an area that they can miss the net.
Well, it's not even up
Well,
yet.
if you miss,
Yeah,
right,
But I mean, it's,
right.
they have tried, like you say, since the 70s, they have done things, and
Well, they're not even
people
in yet,
go
right?
around.
Right, it's not even in
But
yet.
they go around anything they can.
Yeah.
We've had one instance where Sheriff Long had deputies that responded to the bridge. They're sitting on the bridge on one end, waiting because we had a report of a disturbed person. And they sat and they sat and they sat, and they finally said, well, I guess they're not going to show up. They pulled out, and the car was sitting on the other side. And they jumped while they were sitting there the whole time.
Is there video of the bridge?
There's not.
Is that a possibility?
That's part of the call box research that I'm doing, but we're working on the call boxes first because video takes more infrastructure because there's not any power there. It would have to be solar powered. I can run a call box off of solar much better than I can an actual video feed. So it is part of the project, but it's going to be further down the line.
I think Sarah touched on the sticky wicket here. It's any change nullifies it for the registry. I think that's what we're up against here. So that's the big hurdle.
Is there any information, any data we have on time of day or time of year that suicide from the bridge is most prevalent?
Nighttime, you know, we've had just about any time of day, but they are more at night, a lot of times late at night, and even early mornings.
I think one of the things we noticed, and we made a change in the way we do business, is we noticed there would be one, and we used to do press releases on that, and then there would be another, and we do a press release, and then there might be another. And so we've stopped doing press releases because the copycat that comes from it. And so that's one of the things we've been trying to do to try to slow it down.
And the instance where the individual drove from Virginia, that immediately followed a newspaper article that was nationwide. It was like the next day.
I know that I have talked with a lot of people, and in reporting this story, I wanted to be careful how I reported it, not to sensationalize it, which is why I gave the background of how the bridge was built and how it is sort of a community gem. Are there any guiding rules that maybe Joanne can help me with, and you as park rangers, Sheriff Long, any media guidance about reporting carefully on topics like this?
Yes, ma'am. So once again, if you go to our website, tspn.org, I'm sorry to push my own buttons, right? But
It's a great website. You should be
thank you,
pushing
sir.
your own button about
Thank you,
it.
sir. But we have an entire tab for the media, right? It's careful not to sensationalize. Obviously, contagion is so real, and it's definitely something that we have to look out for, especially in our schools when we do debriefings after a postvention, after someone does die by suicide. We want to make sure that we do a debriefing and do it correctly. There are, of course, those best practices on how to go about that. But specifically for the media, not focusing so much on that means, like you were speaking on earlier. We don't want to, when I do trainings, and I do way too many trainings all over Middle Tennessee, right? I spend a brief moment on means, the use of whether it be a bridge, a firearm, and then we move on. We want to talk about these warning signs. We want to talk about these risk factors, and always providing resources, always providing that National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number, always providing that text line number, and making sure that people who are reading that article, seeing whatever it is, can know who to reach out to if they're having those thoughts of suicide.
Joanne, can you tell us about the phrasing when you're talking about suicide?
Yes, ma'am.
Literally, can you tell us the correct phrasing and why?
Yes, ma'am. I would love to. It's sort of my thing, right? So when I say someone died by suicide, I use those words specifically. A turn of phrase that you'll never hear me say is commit suicide. That harkens back to the days of when suicide was illegal. And if we think about it, commit can have those not negative connotations. We can think of commit as being a bad thing. What we want to do is be clear and as non-judgmental as possible. If an individual died by suicide, they did die by suicide. If they attempted suicide, if they have thoughts of suicide, and being clear and trying to, once again, be as non-judgmental as possible. One of the things that we want to do, I know at TSPN, AFSP, everybody, we want to make sure that people realize they can talk about suicide, because if they don't, we don't have these discussions, if we don't know the resources in our area, the numbers will only increase. So making sure that we have those resources and can talk about it.
Well, I think that, it was routine as long as I have worked in media here in Williamson County, which is way, way long, that when there was a suicide, we'd hear something on the scanner, we'd hear an ambulance dispatched, we'd say, oh, something big is going on, and then we would pick up something that would say it was a suicide, and we'd say, all right, stand down, we don't do this. Mm-hmm. And so then we did this series and find out 30 people have died from the bridge, and it kind of makes me wonder if we made the right decision those many, many times we heard that happening.
Definitely, and I think it's that reporting in the way that gets those resources out there, right? Letting those that might be having those thoughts know that they're not alone. They're not the only person in Williamson County having those thoughts about suicide. And stats-wise, since I'm the home of the stats, right, I want to go ahead and throw some out there. For Williamson County in 2016, you did mention the 2016 statewide numbers is at 1,110. The rate for the state, so that's per 100,000 population, is 16.2. We are ranked 22nd in the United States as a whole, so we're the 22nd highest ranked in the U.S. as Tennessee. But in Williamson County specifically, for 2016, there are 21 recorded deaths by suicide in the county. Now, 2016 is the most recent data we have, so it takes time to get this information and get it as accurate as possible. So for 2016, once again, it's at 9.6 per 100,000 population. So the county is at a lower rate than the state is as a whole. 2015, as compared to 2016, had 29 deaths as compared to that 21 deaths. So there is a downward trend. slightly, just looking at those 2 years, right? 2014 was a little bit higher as well.
Are there any theories about the spike in 2016 statewide?
There are several. One of which I would like to highlight is that the medical examiners across the state are becoming more and more informed and educated on accurate reporting. One of the medical examiners at the state, actually, Dr. Lewis, she is new to that position and has taken it on to reach out to every county medical examiner to educate them and get them more comfortable and aware with how to report that.
I have a question for everyone who feels they're informed about Williamson County, just the culture and everything here. As a county, what do you think the driving force behind suicides are?
Is that for everyone? Anyone?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you have a lot of Brentwood parents in this room, so they are no stranger to the pressure put on these kids in school here. You know, I remember the kids came home after registering for classes the next year, and John showed me a schedule, and I said, do you have to take so many AP classes? And he said, Mom, we have to. That's coming from the school. That is not coming from us. You guys, you know, they're all over there. They all have rock star kids in the Williamson County school system. So that's part of it. I think that's part of it. I can speak to that at least.
Well, are there ethnic patterns at all? You know, you were talking about the...
You mean in Williamson County?
In
the state?
The state. I
I
don't
mean,
know if
in
we'd
the-
have a big enough universe.
Yeah, so in the state and even nationwide, but of course, Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network, I focus on Tennessee, middle-aged Caucasian males are our highest number. They're not our highest rate, actually, but they're highest number of suicides in the state and nationwide. It's that 45 to 64 is how middle-aged is defined by the CDC. So that's how it works. But they're our highest number. And firearms is definitely usually their choice of means, and that number continues to grow.
Dr. Wellborn, do you have any hypotheses here?
Well, I was thinking about the question about what are the reasons behind why folks, kids, in my case, in my area, would be suicidal, would be thinking and wondering about whether it'd be better to be dead, and may then even end up attempting to kill themselves. And the reasons are the same for why people in any other area do that. There's the trouble that I run into about statistics is that they are really, really important for having a perspective about how big or small or medium-sized or significant a particular problem is. They're vital. I base as much as I can of the things that I think about and the things that I do and the kinds of ways that what I know and learn about teenagers on the data that's collected from academicians and researchers and empiricists. And so it's crucial. But the problem is that, Joanne was mentioning that the rate in Williamson County is relatively low. But when it's your kid, the stats don't matter. And so this is an individual thing for each individual person. This is true for almost any stat for teenagers, is that there's all kinds of data that's clearly indicating that teenagers as a whole are doing remarkably well in this country. But that's wonderful, except for the parent who's in my office with their kid where something serious is going on. And then it's about what's going on with that kid. And with an adult, it would be the same kind of thing. It's what's going on with that person. And so the stats can actually be a problem on the one hand because it's saying, well, this is not really a problem. And try saying that to anybody who's had a loved one die by suicide, kill themselves. So the things that become important are about, to me, on an individual person-by-person level, is what do I look out for in somebody that I love, in myself, about what's going on, and when I need to start reaching out or find somebody to help me get whatever kind of help there is available to start addressing this problem that's showing up that I'm beginning to notice. And so the kinds of, okay, with all that being said, the kinds of things that predict that are any kind of history of serious psychiatric disorder, any kind of history of depression, especially any kind of history of previous involvement with suicide, either ideation, they're thinking about it, or they're actually having previous attempts, any kind of dramatic instance that's happened in their life that has been a difficult, stressful thing, any kind of persistent, very serious stress, and that can be something that's going on in their own personal relationships. It can be doing things, it can be involve things like bullying or harassment, or, and these days, of course, we've got the online access for the opportunity to be able to do that and get access to people through their online media, social media. So there are these risk factors that are there no matter, in some ways, no matter what your age. There are some that are more likely in the elderly versus adults versus adolescents versus child in those kinds of situations.
And can I thank you for that? So I think in the past we've had, and now, and I think depending on your focus, we tend to have a very micro individual.
Well, I do as a therapist.
Exactly,
sure.
exactly, yeah.
That's
for
where
sure.
I'm at.
Exactly, that's
By
your
necessity.
profession, which is awesome,
exactly.
right? And I think having that micro one-on-one, especially in your given profession, right, being able to interact with the youth, whoever that might be, is crucial. But I also think, and as a loss survivor, of course, I look at these numbers, and I try not to look at the 2011 numbers, because that's the year I lost my father. But if you look at it at a more macro level, right, my focus personally is public health, right, that statewide culture change approach. And I definitely think having these resources, and in this county, I mean, the access you have to be able to sit here and watch it on TV, on YouTube, wherever you are, and have these conversations, realizing that changing your vernacular around suicide can save so many lives.
So you were talking about some of the resources, Joanne. What I found as I kind of tried to follow up these stories, I was looking for Williamson County specific support groups and resources, and I couldn't find a lot. There was a lot of Nashville stuff, certainly. Can you talk about some resources that folks down in Williamson County have specifically?
Of course, yes, ma'am. So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is actually the nationwide number, right? Those here, I'm looking at you, put it in your phone. Pull out your phone right now. Everywhere I go, I have you do this. You're not listening to me. Pull out your phone, okay? So the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number is a 24/7, 365 number. So that's that 1-800-273-8255. You have the text line number. Once again, the same thing, 24/7, 365. You text TN to 741-741, so TN, Lake Tennessee, right, to 741-741. In Williamson County, there are different resources. I'll go over the specific ones first. So if you're dealing with youth and you need an assessment, perhaps, and I would welcome clarification on what that could mean. I'm looking at you, right? But youth villages, so they work with 5 to 17-year-olds who may be at risk for suicide. Your schools can call youth villages. They can come do assessments in the school. Some can do telehealth. I know they're working on that in different counties throughout the state as well. But for youth villages and definitely, so all this information is on our website. I hate to keep saying that, but it really is. If you go to the resources, Mid-Cumberland area, and pull up the regional resource directory, you can look at this and see what is available specifically here in Williamson County. But that youth villages number, I'm happy to give that to you now. It's 791-9222. Okay. And then in the area, another resource, not for youth, but for everybody else, volunteer behavioral health. They cover Williamson County in this area for those assessments, for those crisis needs. And I'll give you that number as well. It's 800-704-2651. And but for me personally, I'm the resource kid. Everywhere I go, I want to make sure that you have those resources. I want to make sure that you have the group that you work with, the group that you're passionate about, that you know those specific warning signs, that you know those specific risk factors that those groups might exhibit. So it might sound like few resources, but they're always there. You can always call those numbers and they can come to that assessment, right?
Well, we'd like to open it up to anyone who's with us tonight who has a question for the panel, if anyone. Yes.
You can come to the front and speak into that mic.
Thank you. I'm Kim Leslie. I have a question for Trish. Since you have now unfortunately become part of a group that you never want to join, a parent of a child who has died from suicide, if you could have anything on this earth, what would you like to see happen as far as suicide prevention, as far as the bridge goes, especially because I know that's a key topic for you?
And that, unfortunately, I know I have a very personal agenda with that, but that, you can understand why. That is my number one. If I could get something done, I wish more folks who have lost people there would come forward. I was kind of hoping that would happen as an outgrowth of the series, and I don't know if any folks are here who would want to open up about that, but that was kind of what I was hoping, so we could kind of band together. I would like to see the numbers. My son was not on the list. I don't know how many other boys, I guess minors weren't on the list you found, so I don't know how many other minors we're talking about. I'd love to get an accurate number. Joanne's talking about those stats. I wonder if you can see where those took place. You can't. Because on John's death certificate, it clearly says, suicide, Highway 96, Natchez Trace Bridge. Clear as day. And I had nothing to do with that, right? So that information's there. I just would love real numbers to see really what we're talking about. I'd love to get something done. Means restriction is real. They're doing it at the Golden Gate. The George Washington Bridge is doing it. There's a bridge in D.C., the Ellington Bridge. It's been effective. People didn't start jumping off the Taft next door. They just didn't do it. The Cornell University gorge bridges, 7 of them now, have nets. It's old thinking to me. Oh, they'll just find another way. It's a shame. It's a pretty bridge, isn't it? It's old thinking. We've got to do something. It's a hazard. It's over a road. A road, not even water. No one survives that jump. 500 people have survived the Golden Gate. No one survives Highway 96 off the Natchez Trace. Not a soul. On the road? No, in the trees, right? Exactly. I'm talking about the road. 145 feet with a 32-inch railing. That to me, I don't know how it was built like that. So that's number one. Number 2, resources. Your child says to you, I asked him, are you thinking of hurting yourself? Tell me. He said, yes. What do you do? There is no playbook. If your child has cancer, diabetes, doctor says do this, 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 and this. Your child says this to you, you are on your own. I called a psychiatrist. I took it out of Brentwood because of the Brentwood bubble. Went to a psychiatrist. That's it. I finally say to him, a year into it, should he be seeing other people too? And he said, oh yeah. No slam against my psychiatrist, but, why isn't there a playbook? Psychiatrist, therapist, pediatrician. Our pediatrician was heavily involved in our marching band that John was in, so I didn't tell her. That's on me. That is my fault, because who knows what she could have set us up for. But, there's just, I wish there's a step-by-step, do this, 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 and this. I wish I'd gotten them to talk to somebody who'd been there and survived it, who'd been in that darkest of places and lived through it. There's a lot.
Thanks for that question. Is there anyone else? Please.
Hi, my name's Virginia Bailey. I live in Brentwood in the bubble. And one of the things that I'm passionate about is the LGBTQ community. In our very conservative area, there's a lot of pressure not to be that. And so 6 years ago, we started PFLAG in Franklin, Tennessee. We meet at St. Paul's Episcopal Church. We're very grateful to St. Paul's for their support. And I just wanted, I don't know if we would have been the right resource for this particular issue. We kind of see ourselves as working a little further upstream, I guess, in the life of a person and in their family. We feel like if we support families on this particular issue, we help not only with suicide prevention, but also with homelessness. So I just wanted to put our name out there and say, we meet every second Monday, 7 o'clock. And we are not therapists, but we help each other and learn from each other and educate each other. And tonight I'm advocating. So thank you for this event. This is a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, both of you, for being here. I can't imagine what it's like to go and be there.
Yeah, and I appreciate you guys being here. Believe me, it
means a lot. It means a lot that you're here. And we weren't sure, you know, when we started this, if you would be able to come. And it means a lot to us, and especially me and Trish.
Yeah.
But what I want to go back to, just so I can understand, the bridge is eligible, you said, for the... I, as a friend of a parent whose son died, want to say, so what? But I also have a lot of respect for the park system and what's happened in our country and how we protect that. So just out of practical measure, can you explain what that means and why that matters? Why does it matter that it's eligible for that particular, I mean...
It's not old.
That's why it's eligible.
But what does that mean down the line? Like, if it's eligible, so what if it gets to be on the historic? What does that mean? Does it mean it'll be taken care of?
It will preserve it in that state for perpetuity.
Okay. And
it becomes a special place recognized by Congress, and it means it's one of those iconic places that is historic and special to the American people.
If I might elaborate, it's not
Please.
It's not an excuse here.
Right.
It's law.
Right.
It's something we can't do anything. It means we have to go through the process, and it has to go through all the reviews, exhaustive, to seek approval to do anything. It's just like to add the suicide prevention signs, we had to go through all of that. To add the call boxes that we're looking at now, we're having to go through that. I have to send in, diagrams of what the post is going to look like, how it attaches, where it's going to attach, what it's going to attach with, how tall is it, how wide is it, how thick is it, is it reflective, what color is it? All these things have to be reviewed, and it's not anything that we can't do anything.
Right. I completely understand that it's out of your hands. I guess what I'm frustrated about is that I'm an American citizen and it's out of my hands, and that I want to do something. And so is there something that we can do that we don't know about? Is there someone that we can contact? Is there someone, can we write and pester them with emails? Can we write a bill? What does it take
What is the process?
to get this process going? Because if it's going to take 20, 30, 40 years, we got to get moving.
Kelly, I can partially interject and answer a little bit of that.
gonna sit down.
This is in Congressman Marsha Blackburn's district, and so she is. If you want to write to her or call her, she would be the person who would have the authority to push any sort of bill or legislation surrounding that. So, Marsha Blackburn.
And I will give her credit. We met with her and have told her of the problem, and she's well aware of the problem, and I think is amenable to do what she can, but we go back to the regulations, and that's part of the problem.
Is there something we can do?
Right.
I think you can write and call her and get her to push it through. I've talked to her, and I've talked to Representative Diane Black. Matter of fact, I had an opportunity to speak last week, and Congressman Black was there, and I talked about the bridge part of it. And so she's well aware of it also.
Oh, good.
Do we have any other questions?
Hi, my name is Barb Dents, and I'm a retired pediatrician. I just had one comment. I think that the state of mental health of our adolescents, our high schoolers, our middle schoolers, our college students in the United States is in a terrible place, and it's increasingly getting worse. And I think that that's something that that's an issue that we can all work toward improving, that would improve the situation. My second question, which is maybe a stupid question, but does the bridge have to be accessible in the middle of the night and in the wee hours of the morning? Is there any real traffic going across there, or are these just people accessing it for purposes that we don't want them to access it? That might be a dumb question, but
It's a great question. Yeah.
Number one, it's a 442-mile national parkway through 3 states, through the middle of the Southeast was the reason it was created. And the logistical part of how do you close it? I have me and 4 rangers to cover 136 miles through 2 states from the Mississippi line to Nashville. And how do you close it? How do you maintain its closure? I can tell you from recent experience, like I do every year when we have ice and snowstorms and we close the road, we spend the entire time it's closed stopping people and charging people for violating the closure. It's not something we can physically and logistically close and keep people out. So that's part of the response to that question.
And like Daniel said, it's a roadway, it's a parkway, and it was our enabling legislation was to create a highway to connect the Southeast, especially the Mississippi area, and to create a corridor for traffic. And we actually do get quite a bit of traffic in the night.
Now, I will back up and say that there are many days I go, I wish I had a gate that I could close many parts of it, not just the bridge, but other parts of, I'm tired of these issues, the vandalism or whatever it is. I wish I could just close that section. So I definitely feel your
It's also
frustration there.
incredibly dark at night, and I wonder why that is. There's just the blinky light on one side and then the blinky light on the other side of the actual bridge. There's no lighting, and that doesn't help either. You could easily sneak up there, you know, and not be seen, so.
And that also goes back to it's a national park, and we try to eliminate the artificial lights. And I'm just I'm answering the question. And there is Tennessee state law that prohibits lighting, signs, anything visible from the parkway. It's under the scenic byways laws.
There's a gentleman with a question. He's very...
Can I go back just a second to the last speaker? She hit it right on point. Our mental health system in Tennessee and across the nation is really at a critical point. When we started closing mental health facilities because of the cost or whatever that reason was, being a sheriff, I unfortunately have a jail, and I am housing more and more mentally ill in the jail that shouldn't be there, but they're caught in the system and shouldn't be in the system. And now we're labeling them as criminals when they shouldn't be labeled. And for instance, if we take one for an evaluation, that is a medical treatment procedure, and we're having to put them in the back of a squad car behind a cage and probably handcuff them to take them, and that just makes the situation more. We average about 360, 70 inmates at a time. I asked our jail administrator the other day to try to look at the mental health aspect of it to see how many of them have a nexus with mental health issues. 65% of the people in our jail have a mental health issue while they're also charged.
And Sheriff, I'll elaborate on that as well. I was Sheriff's Department before I was National Park Service. And as a sergeant with the Sheriff's Department in Tennessee, I transported mental patients several times a week from 100 miles up to Nashville. And one of the problems that you see when they go through the criminal justice system rather than mental health is they're released based on the legal requirements, where if it was mental health, they might be retained and they may be given more help because it would be based on their mental status rather than they've made bond or they've fulfilled their days.
I do also want to speak to the first chunk of your thing there. So youth, middle school, high school, college, we're seeing more and more. So Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network has a higher education task force, and different colleges and universities across the state are seeing more and more students reaching out, high schools as well, middle school, even elementary school. And I do want to mention a study, you can Google it, that does go into, and that they finally had enough time to do a study on this, but screen time, so whether that's a computer, whether that's a cell phone, whether that's an iPad, whether that's whatever it is, does increase that risk of depression, especially in youth. And of course, increased depression has that increased risk of suicidality. It did see a remarkable more increase in male use rather than those female, but that's a thing. When I was a kid, that wasn't a thing. There was no cell phone, there was no screen. I read a book or watched TV, and you can only do that for half an hour a night because Mama says go to bed. So it's a change in our culture and a change that we're seeing, and definitely we're seeing a correlation between that and that risk of suicidal ideation.
And one more point to you. You talked about warning signs. A lot has been said about the warning signs. Let's not, as parents, rely on those because they will often not telegraph those signs. John had the hopeless thing down, but this was a kid who took a shower every day, washed his hair every day. He didn't give things away. There was no talk of when I'm gone. None of that. None of that. A cell phone case came in the mail 2 days later that he ordered from Amazon. So don't get too comfortable with the warning signs as if, okay, well, they're not doing this, this, and this. They must be okay. Not okay.
I do trainings around the state, and I tell people all the time, I wish I could train gut.
Gut, yeah.
I can't train gut.
Yeah.
Let's get that question in.
Yes. He's so patient.
Hi, my name is Neil Kornatek. Thank you all for coming and speaking tonight. I really appreciate this conversation. I'd like to shift it a little bit to means. So there's a Harvard study from 2008 that is titled Guns and Suicide, A Fatal Link. So Sheriff Long, this is probably a question for you as law enforcement. I think this is a conversation that's going on in a lot of different areas right now, probably on gun control, and I think that one thing that people don't necessarily focus in on is that 51% of suicides are the lethality of it is with guns. Mm-hmm. And this study talks about how in areas where people don't have as much access to guns, the suicide death rate is lower. So do you think that there are ways that you could implement ideas to that conversation of what we could do to reduce the availability of guns for people who might be idealizing suicide?
I think as far as the youth of it, we could change the law as to the eligibility of the age of the individual and raise that age up to where they can't get them. But a lot of them that we're seeing, though, are provided by the parent. The parent doesn't secure the weapons. They're laying loose in drawers or in a gun case that's not locked, and the young person can get in there and get those if you're talking about a young person. Middle-aged and others, of course, have the access to it, but I think locking those guns up would help on the younger ones that we've seen. Unfortunately, we've seen it from every avenue. I mean, you know, we've had the hangings, we've had the shootings, we've had the jumps, we've had a little bit of all of it. Tennessee has gotten to where it's so easy to get a handgun permit or get a gun and carry a gun and everything. Seems like I sign off on permits, and I would hate to say that Williamson County is probably the best armed county in the state of Tennessee, as many as I sign on. I just think the availability of the weapons has gotten so great that a lot of people have the handguns now that didn't used to have them, and I think that's why we're seeing the increase in the amounts of people.
I also want to speak, so, I mean, to that point, we at TSPN, we encourage that safe storage, and we try to educate what that looks like. So the two blue brochures you see on the table right there, and they're on the website, I'm sorry, they talk about that for youth as well as for adults, what is safe storage? How can I store my firearm appropriately? Also, and I'm not sure about Williamson County, sorry, but the different sheriff's departments, police departments, and some gun stores throughout the state. I don't have a list of them. I just know that there are some. You can take your firearm to that location and they will store it for you and give it back after a period of crisis has passed. So whether the individual who's in crisis can take that there, or a family member, a concerned individual can do that. I don't know about Williamson, but that's just me.
I'd like to add the Tennessee Department of Homeland Security, Department of Safety, issues the handgun permits. I'm a certified instructor, and they have gone above and beyond as part of the permit class now. There's a whole section on gun use and suicides. And they teach proper storage, give examples of all sorts of storage, give the example of talk to your local police department, sheriff's department if you have a family member or someone who has access to your storage location, you know, talk to them. Not all the sheriff's departments, police departments have, you know, a location they can store them, but it is sometimes an option. But they are pushing that very strongly because they recognize, you know, and teaching people that apply for those permits that you have a very, very strong and grave responsibility for that weapon at all times, not just when it's on your person.
And just FYI, that section and that training is becoming more intensive. There will be audio and visual added soon.
Yeah, there's supposed to be a new one coming out in about a month or so. I saw a preview.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yeah.
More of a comment than just a question, and I want to say, Trish, I'm sorry for your loss, as well as you, Joanne. I just now can see you. I've been sitting back there. I moved here 7.5 years ago after my husband died by suicide. Left me with 2 boys who are now teenagers. And I would really like to see some education in the school system about mental illness in terms of, you know, how students can recognize it in themselves or in maybe someone else, and could be of some help. I think maybe the teachers do get some training, but it's been my experience that it's not a top concern. I don't know what the answer is, but I feel that they kind of sweep it under the carpet. And I realize as parents, people don't want this all in the public. And I think it would be nice if they could take maybe a proactive approach to this rather than reactive. For example, when we had a lot of car accidents in Franklin, not Franklin, but Williamson County, you know, the school system implemented some programs and things like that for safe driving tips, et cetera. I would like to see something proactive in terms of mental health. It's just my suggestion. My kids have struggled a lot, and so it's something that I worry about, and I think that a lot of people just aren't educated. Unfortunately, we were forced to be make ourselves educated about this subject, and a lot of people aren't. So that would just be a suggestion that I have.
No, you're right, and we're sorry for your loss as well. The stigma does hurt them. The stigma hurt John. He had wanted, he wanted to work for the FBI in cybersecurity. I had heard from people who worked for the FBI, oh, they do a background check. They call your high school. They'll call his teachers. And I thought, ooh, so maybe I can't tell anybody.
And they'll ask for previous medical
They will, really.
treatment, and so especially for mental health issues, that in the military. And so the requirements change depending on the demand and the need that the military has, but there are criteria for any kind of involvement in your history with mental health treatment or mental health issues.
So that hurt him, if I'd been more open about it. But, you don't know. If you tell teachers, or you don't know if they'll be afraid of him in light of what's happened in the last 24 hours. I kind of thought about that. Will they be afraid of him now and wondering what he might do, even though we had no guns? So there's all that goes into the whole stigma thing. To your point,
I was thinking about the difficulty, the dilemma of kids. What came to mind from your observations and your thoughts about the school is one thing that we don't have anybody who's representing the schools here, but what I'll say is that the scope and the extent of the things that have to be covered in school makes a lot of things really difficult to kind of add to their curriculum. And this is not an excuse-making thing. This is a practical issue that in the same way that the folks from the National Park Service are talking about all the things that are in place that have to be done, there's a similar kind of aspect of that for schools. So that's one thought that I just was having while you were saying that is the problem that they run into about addressing all kinds of things and how to do that. Certainly important and worthwhile, especially about, as you can imagine from my perspective, the mental health issues and emotional health issues. One of the things that I ran into, which was a part of the series the 13 Reasons Why series, which that video series covered a whole range of things that teenagers were struggling with, including very powerfully and difficult to watch progression of what's the kind of things that can happen with teenagers in adolescence and in the school setting and in their peer relationships. And one of the things that struck me about part of what led to my writing that series is that I kept seeing these essays where people would say, oh, have you heard about 13 Reasons Why? It's so amazing and powerful, but it's also horrible because it idealizes and glorifies suicide and has all of this dramatic stuff. And then the last sentence on their essay would be, and so parents need to talk to their kids about this. Okay, well, I know how difficult it is to talk to kids about each of those issues. And so one of the things in one of those, the episodes in that series that I tried to speak to is how parents can talk to their kids about recognizing when one of their peers is struggling with something. And then what do you say about that? And so that was both from the perspective of just difficult things that are kind of within the regular range of peer difficulties, but also when they know when their gut is telling them something's going on here. Because this same thing about what do schools know how to address that and how do parents know how to address this, we got the same problem with kids about how do you approach your friend and say, something's going on here and I'm worried about you, in a way that respects how awkward that can be and how worried they can be that somehow the friend will get upset, and what happens if they're really worried and they know something serious because that friend has shared something very personal with them about the risk of them being potentially suicidal. And then if you tell people, then your friend's going to get mad at you, and then... So it is complicated, but what I can say is there are some things that you can help your kid understand, and one of the places you can go is to go pull this up on the website and pull one of there are 14 columns. Well, there are actually 16 columns because I divide one of them in two because the issue was so big. But there were a lot of them, and so I can't remember exactly which one was. It was talking about talking to a peer who's in trouble or who you're worried about. And so that's one of the episodes and one of the issues in one of the episodes. And so that's at least one place you can get information. And what I can tell you is that it's really hard to come across. That's part of what prompted us deciding to try that series and see if we could speak to that.
I have a couple of things, as I keep doing. I'm sorry. Staff, faculty, everybody in a LEA public school, so those are your public schools throughout the state, are required to have 2 hours of suicide prevention, intervention, or postvention training every year. So that's your bus driver, your cafeteria ladies, and all of your teachers. Okay. I do want to point out a few resources, a few things that you can reach out to when looking at this student-to-student, youth-to-youth sort of interaction. First, just a shout out to my home county, Murray County. They are actually piloting a peer mediation program. It is in the very beginning. Apparently they did it back in the 80s to success. And I know different counties in the state are obviously doing variations of this and other things, but Murray County, yay. So that is in the stages, right? I do 2 other resources, the Jason Foundation. If you're not familiar with the Jason Foundation, look them up. So Clark Flatt, is a huge supporter of TSPN. He lost his son, Jason, to suicide. The Jason Foundation is a nationwide organization, and they're based in Hendersonville, which is so not far, which is awesome. They do have a program that you can find online that is that peer-to-peer youth program that you can look into. Another, and then I'll shush. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention has recently released an initiative. It Sees the Awkward, I believe, is what it's called. I know awkward's in it. Sees the Awkward, thank you. And Google it. Sees the Awkward. And it just does that, right? You mentioned that awkward situation, right? It sees that awkward for that peer-to-peer interaction, especially in our youth, to be able to have those interactions, ask those questions, and make sure that they're all safe.
And that's broader than the kinds of resources that Ms. Purley is talking about is broader than even just concern about your friend or peer or kid being suicidal. It's about issues and about, so the peer-to-peer, the programs are not specific, often, rarely are specific to suicide. They're about all kinds of things that kids may be struggling with and how to kind of train kids to be able to talk to each other about that. So it's an interesting kind of waveform to me about, I'm old enough now that there was a period, as you were saying, many years ago when that was really broad-based, and then I don't hear much about that. And so it's interesting and I think nice to hear that it has the potential of coming back around. That's been found to be useful.
And I do also want to point out that all the resources, all the numbers, all the lifelines, everything, those are crisis lifelines, right? Those are crisis things. They're not just specifically for suicide. If you're having substance abuse issues, you can call those lifeline numbers. If you're having any crisis issue whatsoever, you can reach out to those numbers and get that help that you need.
I think we had another question in the back. No. Oh, we've got 2.
Yes, I was just going to speak to the education request, too. I have a daughter at Brentwood High, and one of her friends tried to commit suicide about a year ago, and between she and her friends, they knew 17 kids at Brentwood High who had tried to commit suicide. And she went to the school and said, can we do something? Can we have a program? And nothing's happened. It's been a year later. And we talked about, could we even do something at the library? But I do think there's a need for kids because it is epidemic. But one last comment, and that was around the bridge. And is there some sort of possibility that there could be drone surveillance to maybe identify people that, might be lingering, or is that a park violation also?
Yeah.
I'd like how strong the drone issue is. We're not allowed to use drones for anything.
Yeah.
We have to have FAA qualified, certified. There's got to be a pilot, a backup pilot, and a backup pilot, and another team of 5. I mean, it is just the most restrictive thing you've ever heard of.
And then on top of it, we have to get approval from Washington. And we know how that takes.
Well, and I want to mention again DOS. Okay, I mean, dadgummit. It's like if you can't get just a computer, it's like that's nowhere near the cost of a drone. And so I'm like horrified and have such tremendous, I don't know, sympathy for you trying to navigate any kind of information with what you're describing as the resources that y'all have. So.
You know, I'm just going to make one comment about resources. 12 years ago, we had 39 rangers for the entire parkway. We now have 22.
Wow. Why is that? Why has the number declined?
Budget.
One more question.
That's not enough.
That wasn't a restrictive thing. If you have more questions.
Hi, my name's Wendy Allstrand, and I've had children at Scales, Brentwood Middle, and Brentwood High School. And there's a really ugly side, so I thank you for your courage to speak. There's a really ugly side to Williamson County schools and how they approach mental health. For students with disabilities, they're required to provide appropriate services such as counseling if the students need that. I'm sure you're aware, for special education. And they're not even helping the ones that they already know want to kill themselves. I get that it's difficult to know how many children there are, but for my personal situation, and I know several stories like this, my son 12 was being tested at Brentwood Middle just this year, and he's been seeing a psychiatrist since he was 4. He was diagnosed with depression and talking about him wanting to die. So he's had services his whole life privately. He left their special education testing because he was having thoughts of running to kill himself. The Williamson County psychologist knew that, and even still, no counseling services in his IEP, and they sit in these IEP meetings and they pretend that they don't have to provide any of this. I know better. A lot of parents don't know better. So they're thinking their kids are getting everything that they need to learn, to make progress, to be safe, and they're not. And, you know, high ACT scores are great, but they're not great if you're dead in 18. And I just think there's several stories here, and the people in district who are right upstairs, they know about these things, and they're not doing anything about it. And I wish they were here. They just had to come down the stairs. But that's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Any more questions?
Yes.
My name is Jennifer Kiley, and this is a big, complex issue, but I did want to just bring it back to the bridge, just briefly. And I don't want to pick on the park people. I'm so glad you're here. I love a beautiful bridge. I love an historic cultural marker. My background is in archaeology. That's right up my alley, right? I think that's fabulous. But my sons were friends of John's, so I'd rather have a net. We know how difficult it is to do anything about gun control in this country and some of these other issues and the education, all of that. But this is a piece that I think, it's a tough hill to climb, I get that. So I think what we're looking to you guys for is what's your advice on how to make these changes happen so that we can do something like a net. Our family, I've lost 4 people in the last 2 years, 3 to suicide and 1 to murder. But John's means seems to me something we can do something about. Thank you.
I got some great friends, don't I?
Yes, you do.
They're very articulate, too. I owe you guys a margarita after this.
Well, if there are no more questions, I would like to mention that if you'd like to read those 13 Reasons Why columns by Dr. Wellborn, they are on the home pages under local news, drag down columnists, and scroll down, and you'll find them all in chronological order, or go to, is it drjameswellborn?
drjameswellborn.com. On my website, down at the bottom, you'll be able to access those on the website, too. And all kinds of other parenting resources, and for both parents and of teens and teens themselves. There's all kinds of stuff I have on the website. So.
If you forget that URL, Google Dr. James Wellborn, and you'll find it pretty quick.
Yeah.
And he's in Brentwood, too, so James Wellborn, Brentwood. So
in the bubble.
In the
If
bubble.
you missed these stories, you can go to the Franklin homepage, and if you can search suicide Natchez Trace Bridge, and they should pop up if you want to read more.
Right. It's a very interesting series, and you know, all of us love the bridge too. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and nobody wants to mess it up, and we want to make it better. And that's why we embarked on this project, is to try and contribute something to people,
And give people an open space to talk about their struggles and suicide and mental health. So thank you all for coming.
Indeed.
Thank you all for being here. We appreciate the panelists, and we appreciate the people that are watching the live stream, and we appreciate the people that the county has provided to do all this TV and audio and stuff. Good night, everybody.
Night. Thank you.